I'm Melissa Muir. Welcome back for another Tool Time Tuesday. Lately I've received a lot of requests for information regarding the textures that you get from a rolling mill versus those from a hydraulic press. People are wanting to know which is better. And I'm here to kind of describe the differences between them because one is not necessarily better than the other. And then also the way in which you use them after you have those textures can vary greatly as to the results that you are going to receive. So I'm going to show you just a couple of differences really quickly, and that might help clear up some of the information requests that I have. So here I have a pretty varied set of samples. Some of them are embossed with the hydraulic press, while others have been roll printed through the rolling mill. Embossing is different than roll printing because of the way that things are done. Those that are made in the hydraulic press have a little higher relief, and they also have kind of a hollow back behind the product that comes out of this. So in this case, I would have created a wire armature and then some wire design, placed my metal on top of that, a piece of urethane, and then compressed it with a really high amount of pressure to get this. And at that point, what happens is your metal just kind of forms around whatever is underneath. And that is the process of the embossing. So this is kind of an example of one that I've put together. I just took some 12 gauge wire, soldered it together after I formed it into the swirls, and now I can use this as a texture plate. This is another example. I took a little thinner wire in this case, and on this particular sheet, this is a really thin gauge of metal. However, I do have it where I've also done this with 20 gauge. So you can see the difference between, the metals, the thicknesses. The thicker gauges are going to give you a little lighter impression than those that have a really thin gauge. So again, the process was the same, just created my little wire armature, soldered it together, and now I can emboss on that. Now, one of the things that people like to do once they have a nice little texture is to form that in a hydraulic press. Well, when you have an embossed shape that you try to form in a hydraulic press, it doesn't necessarily work so well. And you can see here, this was actually done based off of this pattern here. In this case, I have 24 gauge copper, and the whole texture has just completely flattened out. Even here where it was along the die that I was forming with has also smoothed out. However, there is still a little bit more here, but I did lose my texture here. And that is just because what happens is when you get that urethane forming into this, it just stretches your metal out and puffs it, and it releases that texture that you once had with your hydraulic press, again, because the relief is so high on this. So here I've taken a couple of texture dies and just created the texture on this, and you will see that both sides have a fairly high relief of this from this metal and the texture dies. So you can see that. And again, that lends itself to being just smoothed back out if you're going to place a high amount of pressure onto that to form it into something else. So if you're wanting the high relief, then those embossing techniques are fantastic from the hydraulic press. Here is an example of a bracelet that I did. And again, you can see that I've got that high relief, and I still left it, and all I did with this is just cut out the shapes with a disc cutter. So this allows me to keep that. However, if I were to go in and try to form this into a silhouette or a matrix die, then I would lose that texture. Now, when we're talking about a rolling mill, things are a little bit different. We have a very low relief. And in addition to that, basically what's happening is you are thinning the metal or compressing it in certain areas and not in others. So if I look at the back of this piece, you can see that it's still pretty much flat. We don't have any of that relief that's coming from being pressed into a cavity like we would with some of the embossing dies. So in doing that, I'm able to keep a lot of my texture a lot better because it's not being pressed out when I take it into a silhouette or a matrix die. And at that point, I'm able to keep a lot more of this texture. So here's some other examples. In this case, I did a little bit of kambu, and then I formed it by rolling it through, not formed it, but I did take this through the rolling mill And then I did form this in a silhouette die. So this one has a couple of different things going on with that. In this instance, for this pendant, I rolled it through the rolling mill, and then I just took it and dapped it a little bit. And you want to be careful if you're going to do some of that dapping, because if the metal dap hits into that concave section on your dapping block, then you can easily smooth out this texture. So in this case, I didn't take it too far, just enough to give it a little bit of a dome, and then I just ruffled the edges. So again, with the rolling mill, we have a low relief where we're actually compressing the metal around some of that higher relief in the texture dies or the texture patterns that we have. Whereas in the hydraulic press, we actually have a pretty high relief on both sides that can easily be smoothed out if we put enough pressure on this to form it into something else. Now, what do I use for some of these patterns on the rolling mill? Well, there's a number of places where you can actually get some little one-off paper texture patterns. You have to kind of experiment with them a little bit, and I have better results with some versus others. But they are kind of nice because they're very inexpensive ways to get some fantastic custom textures onto your pieces. And like I said, there's a few different places if you just do like a search for rolling mill patterns or rolling mill textures, and you'll find some of those. So I hope that kind of clears things up for you a little bit versus the rolling mill and the hydraulic press.